Hi, this is Lainey Cameron. I'm here with Nikki May, who is joining me, I think, from the United Kingdom. Where are you joining me from, Nikki?
Hi, Lainey. I'm in Dorset, which is in the West Country in the middle of nowhere in England.
Oh, I love it. And you know what? Pronounce the name of your book for me because I don't want to get it wrong. How do you say it?
My debut novel is called Wahala.
And it kind of tell us what the title means because I was just reading up about this on your page. So it kind of means like someone who comes with trouble attached to them. Is that right?
Wahala is a pidgin English word, so you hear it everywhere in Nigeria. It comes from an Arabic word. Pidgin English often travels around West Africa, so the origins are Arabic. It means trouble. You hear it a lot in Nigeria, 10 times a day, usually with a groan or a sigh.
And it's a perfect word to describe this book, which is a book about friendship between three women, and then a fourth one kind of comes in and kind of intrudes on their friendship, kind of upsets the balance of how things are going. But why don't you tell folks who've not heard of the book yet? It just came out January, right? It just came out
Yeah.
last month. So tell folks a little bit about the book.
Cool. My publishers are describing it as Sex and the City with a killer edge, and I'm okay with that. It's set in the city. There's a bit of sex in it. They drink cocktails, but it's slightly more diverse than the original Sex and the City. I describe it as a subversive modern take on friendship, family, and culture, and it's underpinned by a rather epic revenge twist. It's centered on three 30-something friends living in London, and they share a mixed Nigerian British heritage. And I think I got that idea from me. And there's Ronke. She's dating Kayode. She's a dentist. She wants Kayode to be the one. She's desperate for happy ever after and 2.2 kids. Then there's Boo, who has everything Ronke wants: nice husband, gorgeous child, lovely kitchen. But she's frustrated and unfulfilled and wants to get back to the real her. Simi is the golden one with the perfect lifestyle and wardrobe, on the surface at any rate, but she suffers from imposter syndrome. Her husband thinks they're trying for a baby. She's not. These women are all living their best lives, doing the best they can, until Isabel explodes into the friend group. She's very rich and very glamorous. And at first, it seems she's bringing out the best in the friends. But Isabel is a wrecking ball, and her motives for causing wahala, trouble, propel the narrative all the way to that twist I talked about.
Well, I gotta say, you've got me hooked. I think I'm about halfway through right now, and I was like up late last night, and I couldn't go to bed. And my husband was like elbowing me on bed, going like, "Come on, honey, you can't read all night." So
Job
I no
done.
no spoilers because I'm almost like I said, I'm like halfway through, and
No
I'm loving it.
spoilers.
It's fabulous, and I'm loving, especially being British. I'm Scottish originally, despite the accent. I'm loving all the Britishisms in the book, but also I'm learning a lot about like Nigerian food as I go through it. There's a lot of food I wasn't familiar, and I noticed at the back you've got some recipes at the back of the book for some of the dishes that come up again and again. Was that your idea, or was it something the publisher suggested? Like, it's a great
Oh
idea.
no, that was my idea from day one. There were always going to be recipes in the book. I think Nigerian food is really underrated, and I think it's time to put it on the map. But also, I wanted the book to be a celebration of the characters' two cultures, which also happen to be mine. And food is such an important part of culture. And I think it's an important part of life. I can't imagine an occasion where I've met my friends where food of some sort hasn't been involved. So there's a lot of food in the book. So needed to chuck some recipes at the back.
Well, you've inspired me. I'm going to be in the UK visiting family in March, so I think I'm literally going to go like find a good Nigerian restaurant and try some of these dishes I've never had.
Good.
Um, So, inspiration. Where did the idea for this book? It's got so many different themes running through it. So I'm really fascinated on like where the idea and inspiration originally came from.
I've always wanted to write a book that had people like me in it. So from the beginning, I always knew that my characters would be mixed race and middle class. A lot of books with Black people or by Black people tend to focus on trauma and struggle and pain. And we're not a monolith. That's not a universal experience. I wanted to write the kind of book I like to read. So aspirational, page turnery, sort of very modern, very contemporary. And I'd had this idea of a book, the sort of themes I'd had, friendship was definitely going to be part of it. A shocking twist was always going to be part of it. But I put it off and put it off because work got in the way. And writing a book is really hard. Getting started is really hard. It takes a lot of confidence. A blank page is a scary thing. But one day, after a very long and loud lunch with friends at a Nigerian restaurant that is quite similar to the Nigerian restaurant in the book, I boarded the train home and I had a pad and pencil with me. I always have a pad and pencil. I'm list obsessed. And I started sketching out the first scene, and Ronke, Boo, and Simi came into my head. And but by the time I got home, I realized I'd written the first scene of a book. And I I think getting those first words down was what it took. The plot was all over the place. The characters weren't fully formed, but I had a start. I had something that I could dive into. And after that, I did a very short course, a creative writing course online for 6 weeks called Start Writing Your Novel. And I'm still friends with some of the people I met on that course. And the book literally poured out of me. In 6 months, I had a first draft.
That's amazing. And did it have to change a lot from that first draft as you went through the editing? Like, how many years was the process between that first draft and this book that we got to see?
Hell yeah. It took 2 years before I queried agents. So the draft came out in 6 months. I then printed it out, loads of paper, flicked through it, read half of it, realized it was terrible, as in absolutely terrible.
As in,
And
it
my
was a first draft, everybody's first draft.
but I didn't know this at the time. I just thought, oh my God, it's hopeless. So I put it in a drawer, shut the drawer. And unfortunately, I told people what I was doing. So they keep saying, how's that book going? And I'd be like, don't ask, don't ask. But the girls were still talking to me in my head. So I dug it out and I pulled it apart and I realized it was Wahala that was needed. That I somehow, because I'd fallen in love with my characters, although I knew what I wanted to do, I didn't do it. So nothing bad happened to them. They just ate
Mm.
loads of food and wore lots of clothes and talked a lot. So I unpicked it all, threw loads of trouble at it. And I think the good thing is by the time I got to the end, my characters were fully formed. So when I went back, I could put that full formation in from day one, which made the story much richer, much stronger. And writing is all about editing. I think the thing that's good about being a debut is you don't know all the rules. So you don't know much about genre, although I'm a big reader and I've always have been a reader. I never thought in genre terms, because I read really widely. I read all sorts of things. So I've never sort of thought, oh, I've got to write a crime book, or oh, I've got to write a literary book. I just wrote the sort of book I'd like to read. And if I knew then what I knew now, I might not have. I might have been a bit worried about mixing thriller with friendship, mixing all these different things together. But now that I look back, I don't think I'd have done it any other way. So I'm glad I
Do
didn't know
you
anything.
It's a really good question because it's got those thriller elements. I've got you on because I consider it women's fiction because it's got the
Yes.
friendship and these really well developed characters of the women are all very different and really well developed. But like, how do you think about genre? Do you just hate the whole word? Do you view it as a certain genre? Do you just think it's a pain in the derriere? Like, how do you view genre?
I think it is a pain, and I think publishers like having handles to hang us on. So you're this sort
Right.
of book or you're that sort of book. And I guess I worked in advertising, so I get it. I get the idea that you need these handles, but I think it can be quite limiting. And also I hate it when people are snobby about books and when women's fiction is considered a bad word. It's like, really? I absolutely resent that. I abhor it. And maybe because I read all sorts of things. So I hate the idea of women's fiction and men's fiction. I mean, it's just a stupid concept, almost as stupid as the concept of black fiction and white fiction. I just find all these handles are very limiting. And I think they almost imply that your audience is too stupid to just recognize good writing.
Yeah, and I like the fact that your book, like you said, the characters are, I'm trying to think how to say this. They're dealing with issues that come from their heritage, right? They've all got their own backstory and background, and they're different backstories and background, even though they've all got that connection to Nigeria and grew up at some point in their childhood. But one of the things that was really interesting to me is it's not a story about that. That's their backstory of who they are. but the book is not about that. And I thought that was great because I was actually talking to another author just a couple of weeks ago. I do see that we tend to want authors of color to write immigrant stories about dealing with issues of color only.
Thank you.
And yeah,
That is such a good point. And you're completely right. The fact that they're mixed race is part of their background. It's texture. It's not front and center. And yes, you can't have mixed race characters without touching on race and colorism and class. But the story's not about that. Those are just things that, just like I have, you just deal with. They're not everyday things. They're just little annoying things that happen on a day-to-day way. And I do find, sometimes in conversations like, oh, we must get some Black bloggers to read your book. You think, well, let's just get bloggers to read my book. We don't have to have pinpoint it. I wouldn't ask you, should we get some Scottish people to read your book? You'd
right.
be like, well, yeah, and English ones and
Oh,
American
yeah.
ones, so I do find it slightly frustrating, but
Yeah, no, I can see that. Well, it's very well done, and your characters are great. Like, it's hard when you're a debut, I think, to get the character. I worked on character a lot in my own debut, to get the character to come across on the page and for the reader in their mind in the same way they are in your mind. And
yeah.
so, one of the things I'm interested in is you have so many Britishisms in this book. I mean, you've got a lot of Nigerian background, but you've also got a lot of Britishisms. Did they have to translate a lot of it for the American audience? Did they actually go and change words, or do they just leave it as it is?
Hardly any. I think there's one mention of soccer that was changed to football, but I was amazed at how little was changed. And I'm really
Interesting.
glad. I'm really glad because also I didn't want any of my Nigerianisms changed. There was one point where someone said, oh, we need to explain who Fela Kuti is. And I was like, no, we don't. If I wrote about Elvis Presley, you wouldn't explain who he was. And if a Nigerian was reading about Elvis Presley, they would get the idea that this is a musician and he must have been quite big and famous. And I do think we need to give readers credit for having some intelligence. And if it's written in the right context, you can read around it. Plus, we all have Google. So if there's
Right.
something you don't understand, check.
I was talking to Mansi Shah a couple of weeks ago, and her book it takes place in and out of India. It's a first generation U.S. Person from the U.S. who goes back to India. And one of the things she said is like, we all have Wikipedia. Like, if someone wants to
Exactly.
Wikipedia it, they can do it. I don't need
Exactly.
to explain it. And her point was the character would never stop and think, oh, that's who this is. It just makes the
Yeah,
book completely inauthentic because there's no
totally.
way the character would ever explain something like that.
And I read a lot of American books, and to today, I do not know what grits are. And if you gave me a bowl of grits, but it doesn't stop me understanding what's going on. They're eating food and they like it. So I do think we can accept that you don't have to explain everything, that if it's written well, the context
There
is
you go.
all
So clearly, when I go to the UK, I've got to find, I'll ask you for recommendations offline, a really good Nigerian restaurant in London. And when you
done.
come to the US, you've got to find a really good Southern restaurant to have shrimp and
Yes,
grits
I
so you can
need
finally say
grits.
you've had it. So you've obviously learned so much along this journey. What advice do you give to writers who would like to be you, who are maybe starting their debut or hoping to get their debut published? Like, what do you advise other writers?
I think the best piece of advice is to read. I'm ancient, I'm 56, and this is my debut, so it's taken me a long time. But I think what's helped me get here is reading. I've read a book a week since I was 15 probably, and I read really widely, and I honestly think it's helped me so much. It's helped me understand the structure of a book. I wasn't thinking about it, but just subliminally I've absorbed so much info. So I think read widely, read brilliant, amazing books that make you feel inadequate, but also read some really rubbish, crap books that make you feel, actually, I'm not so bad. And when you have that unconfident moment, because I do think self-doubt is a prerequisite for being an author. It's an essential quality. So you need to read a bit of rubbish just to help boost your self-doubt. The other piece of advice would be keep going, just plow through that shitty draft that we talked about. I've met so many people that have spent so long polishing and repolishing the first chapter. There are people who I was on the same course with where I wrote this book who are still polishing chapters 1, 2, and 3. And it's like, just keep going. I have placeholders where I say, this is crap. come back and sort it out, or no idea what's going on, we'll need to find a way, but just keep trying to plow through to the end because you're going to change it all anyway. So get to the end. And the
I
third,
love this is rubbish. I've never heard anyone give the this is read some rubbish advice. That's
oh
brilliant.
yeah,
Sorry, your third thing.
oh, yeah, definitely. I've got quite a few of those in my book too. And the third piece of advice is try and write from the heart. I think it helps. And that's why I think for a debut, the gift of being a debut is the lack of knowledge. So because you're not burdened with expectation or with all this new things you've learned, you can just sort of write what you want to read.
I love that. I love that. And talking of which, don't give me a list of the rubbish books, although I love that tip. I'm going to go find myself some rubbish to read. But what about the good ones? Do you have anything you could recommend that folks might want to read that you've enjoyed?
So one of the favorite books I've read lately, and I'm not sure if it's out in the States, I'm not sure. It's by Kate Sawyer and it's called The Stranding. It is just beautiful. It's a dystopian end of the world book, which I tend to like, but it's also about life and hope and survival. It's a wonderful book, and it was long listed for the Costa Prize, so that's how good it was. A book that came out and I know it's out in the States, I think it came out late last year, is called In Every Mirror She's Black by Lola Akinmade Akastrom. And she's Swedish Nigerian, and it's about three very different women. But again, a bit like my book, it's about modern, sassy women trying to get on with their lives. And I really think she digs deep into character. And a book I haven't read, but I am desperately counting down the days, is Sea of Tranquility by my favorite author of all time, Queen Emily St. John Mandel.
Awesome. And I'll put the links to those in the show notes. So if you go to the website, it'll have the links to those books so people can find them. And is there anything I haven't asked you before we wrap up and we work out where people can connect with you? Anything I haven't asked that you wanted to be sure to say?
The other thing is, a lot of people, my book was sold as book to film, so it's going to be a TV series on BBC, which I'm thrilled about, absolutely over the moon. And I think one thing that really helped when I was writing Wahala is to see things visually. So sometimes, especially if it's a scene that has lots of people in it, sometimes just imagine it, picture them, see where they're sitting, see how they're talking to each other, and then write what you see. I found it really helpful in scenes where there are more than 2 or 3 people to actually try and look at it in my head and then write it down.
That's great advice because you do have a lot of scenes. I'm thinking about it in your book where there's several of them at once around a table
Yeah,
or in a restaurant or having drinks. And yeah, that is difficult to write because it's
it
really
is.
hard for the reader to keep a handle on where and who
Yeah,
is talking.
and
Yeah,
where
good
they
point.
are. But if you get it in your head, it somehow comes out easier.
Oh, that's great. Well, if folks want to connect with you and follow the progress of when this will come out on BBC, I know it just started, but it's so exciting. Well, it's the studio that's owned by BBC, but it's still
Yes.
super exciting.
Yeah.
If folks want to connect and they want to follow your progress, what do you recommend? Where do you like to turn up in social media?
Please come and find me on Twitter, where I'm at Nikki O May, and I'm still learning Instagram. Instagram's hard. I don't get it yet, but I'm trying. And there I'm at Nikki May Writer.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Nikki. And I would encourage everyone to go read this one. It's like my own book, it's about friendship. So I am loving that aspect of this book. You do such a great job of portraying the friendship between the women, but it's also a little darker and it's witty and it's humorous. Like, it's a great read. I can see why they compared to Sex and the City because of the humor aspect of it. But it's also serious, right? It's got some really serious themes and it's got a little thriller aspect. So I love how you blended all of those things. Congratulations. It's a great book.
Thank you so much, Lainey. And I'm now about to add your book to my list of books I have to read. So thank you for
You're a
having
sweetheart.
me.
Thanks for joining me today.